Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. We're reading Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky, Part 2. If you read Part 1 with me, you should have jump-started your understanding of this by reading my analysis of Part 1. It's a very complex story, not easy to read, and not easy to digest, and not easy to understand. But if you do stick with me and we understand it, you'll find a lot about yourself that perhaps you don't know. This is part 2. You ready? Part 5. Now, there's 2 parts. If you remember the author's note in the front, there's 2 parts to the notes that he had. The author's note, part 1 is a little bit about himself, and then in part 2, you're going to see the anonymous narrator in action. And we are watching a narrator, and if you remember, he began part 1 by saying he's a sick, spiteful, unattractive man. He's got some issues, doesn't he? Let's go. Part 5. Come. Can a man who attempts to find enjoyment in the very feelings of his own degradation possibly have a spark of respect for himself? I'm not saying this now from any mawkish kind of remorse. Mawkish, sentimental in a feeble, sickly way. Mawkish. So he's not saying this from a mawkish or remorse. And indeed, I could never endure saying, quote, "Forgive me, Papa, I don't do it again," end quote. Not because I am incapable of saying that. On the contrary. Perhaps just because I have been too capable of it. And in what a way, too. As though of design I used to get into trouble in cases when I was not to blame in any way. That was the nastiest part of it. At the same time, I was genuinely touched and petulant, that I used to shed tears and, of course, deceived myself. Though I was not acting in the least, and there was a sick feeling in my heart at the time. ... Notice the ellipses. This is a complex character, and remember, this is diary narration, so he's writing in his diary. Sometimes we hear him talking and addressing quote-unquote gentlemen, but in this case, he's really talking to himself, which is profound, because we often talk to ourselves, but we often don't take time to write in our own diary. Let's continue. For that one could not blame even the laws of nature, though the laws of nature have continually all my life offended me more than anything. It is lonesome to remember it all, but it was lonesome even then. Of course, a minute or so later, I would realize wrathfully that it was all a lie, a revolting lie, an affected pretended lie. That is, all this penitence, this emotion, these vows of reform. You will ask why I worry myself with such antics. The answer? Because it was very dull to sit with one's hands folded, and so one began cutting capers. That is really it. Observe yourselves more carefully, gentlemen, and then you will understand that it is so. So I invented adventures for myself and made up a life, so at least to live in some way. How many times it has happened to me, for instance, to take offense simply on purpose and for nothing. And one knows oneself, of course, that one is offended at nothing, that one is putting it on. Putting what? See the pronoun it? That one is putting it on. What? Being offended, taking offense at something. But yet, one brings oneself at last to the point of being really offended. So you pretend to be offended, and you keep pretending to be offended, and then you're really offended. And all my life, I have had an impulse to play such pranks, so that in the end, I could not control it in myself. Control it. What's it? The pranks, the act of being offended for nothing sometimes. Another time, twice in fact, I tried hard to be in love. I suffered too, gentlemen, I assure you. In the depth of my heart, There was no faith in my suffering, only a faint stir of mockery. But yet I did suffer, and in the real orthodox way, I was jealous, besides myself, ... And it was all from ennui, gentlemen, all from ennui. What is ennui? It's a feeling of listlessness and dissatisfaction from the lack of occupation or excitement. He was bored, so he was inventing these feelings, perhaps. So that he said it was all from ennui, semicolon, inertia overcame me. What's inertia? The tendency to do nothing, to remain unchanged. So you have to understand the concept of change and inertia. This is a scientific term. This is obviously an educated guy who's writing this, right? The word inertia is not a word you use every day. I must overcome my inertia, right? Inertia means you're doing nothing. So he's saying inertia overcame me. You know, the direct, legitimate fruit of consciousness is inertia. So he's saying that when you're conscious of something, the fruit of consciousness is doing nothing. That is, conscious sitting with your hands folded. The difference between acting and thinking is very important throughout this Notes from Underground. I want you to keep that in mind, that we're talking with a guy who thinks too much. This narrator is very thoughtful, perhaps too thoughtful. And we're gonna see this again and again and again. I have referred to this already. I repeat with emphasis, all direct persons and men of actions are active just because they are stupid and limited. Aha. So he's saying when men of action are stupid and limited, what does that mean? Well, he believes because he's conscious and he thinks a lot. And you'll see as this story unfolds, he's not necessarily a man of action, right? But he thinks men of action are stupid and limited. How explain that? He asks. I will tell you, in consequence of their limitation, they take immediate and secondary causes for primary ones. And in that way, they persuade themselves more quickly and easily than other people to do that they have found an infallible foundation for their activity. And their minds are at ease, and you know, that's the chief thing, isn't it? To begin an act, pay attention, you know you must first have your mind completely at ease and no trace of doubt left in it. I want to repeat that. See my little note here with the arrow? What is this? To begin an act, you know you must first have your mind completely at ease and no trace of doubt left in it. I think that's true if you think about it, right? When you take an action, if you're driving your car and you see a light and you realize that's the street you have to turn left, there's no more doubt. Once you realize that's the street you need to turn left, there's no more doubt in your mind and you act, right? That's what he's saying. You have to clear your mind completely at ease. Now, if you know anything about sports and you know about baseball, if the pitcher tries to throw a strike, the more he tries to hit that zone with the ball, the more likely he is to being the batter. He's got to be completely at ease, completely natural when he's throwing that baseball. And those of you who have played sports know what I'm talking about. When you're acting, you're not thinking. And when you're thinking, you're not acting. We're going to talk a lot about that. Let's continue. Why? How am I, for example, to set my mind at rest? Where are the primary causes on which I'm to build? Where are my foundations? Where am I to get them from? I exercise myself in reflection, and consequently with me, every primary cause at once draws after itself another, still more primary, and so on and on to infinity. I call this a logic loop because he keeps thinking of and he keeps primary. That is just the essence of every sort of consciousness and reflection. It must be a case of the laws of nature again. In other words, that's the way people are set up to think. What is the result of it in the end? What's it? What's that pronoun referring to? The idea of thinking. Why? Just the same. Remember, I spoke just now of vengeance. I'm sure you did not take it in. Parentheses. I said that a man revenges himself because he sees justice in it. Therefore, he has found a primary cause, that is, justice. And so he is at rest on all sides, and consequently he carries out his revenge calmly and successfully, being persuaded that he is doing a just and honest thing. But I see no justice in it, and I find no sort of virtue in it either, and so consequently, if I attempt to revenge myself, it is only out of spite. There's that word again. Right? Spite. Spite, of course, might overcome everything, all my doubts, and so might serve quite successfully in place of the primary cause, precisely because it's not a cause. That's a confusing statement. Spite might overcome everything as the primary cause, but it's not the primary cause. But what is to be done if I have not even spite? Parentheses. I began with just that now, In consequence, again, of those accursed laws of consciousness, anger in me is subject to chemical disintegration. This guy's looked at himself a lot. I want you to think about this because this first part is talking about him, his feelings. And if you read my analysis for part 1, you have to stick it out. You have to try to understand this guy. Well, Jimmy, I'm not like him. No. That's okay. You don't have to be like him. But there's things in him that are, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, in all of us. Think about what he just wrote. Anger in me is subject to chemical disintegration. There's theories out there that we're all comprised of chemicals. You know this. So you look into it. What's it? The object flies off in the air. Your reasons evaporate. The criminal is not to be found. The wrong becomes not a wrong, but a phantom. Something like a toothache, for which no one is to blame, and consequently there is only the same outlet left again. That is, to beat the wall as hard as you can. What the heck is he talking about? Remember the toothache and about the pain and if you have a toothache, you're taking pleasure in the pain. You see what he's saying here? This is a complex character, ladies and gentlemen. You might, well, he's nuts, Jimmy. You might say that. But is he? What's he saying here? You look into it. What's it? Anger? Look into anger. Do you ever get angry? Have you ever been angry? When you get angry, what do you feel? Rage? What? Does the anger die out? You're angry at something? Something happened, so you get angry. I've seen anger in other people. I have felt anger. Have you felt anger? What do you do when you're angry? This guy says you look into anger, the object flies off into the air, the object of your anger, your reasons for being angry evaporate, the criminal is not to be found, the object of your anger, the wrong becomes not a wrong, but a phantom, something like a toothache, for which no one really is to blame, and consequently there is only the same outlet left again to beat the wall as hard as you can. You've seen scenes in movies where guys punch walls in anger, throw things in anger. There's lots of angry scenes when you get angry. And that's what he's talking about here, anger. So you give it up with a wave of a hand because you have not found a fundamental cause. What is the cause of your anger? He's saying it kind of evaporates, it becomes a phantom. And try letting yourself be carried away by your feelings. Let's get this adjusted here. Sorry. Pardon me. Try being carried away by your feelings blindly, without reflection, without a primary cause, repelling consciousness, at least for a time. Hate or love, if only not to sit with your hands folded. The day after tomorrow, at least, you will begin despising yourself for having knowingly deceived yourself. And the result? A soap bubble and inertia. In other words, poop, soap bubbles. They burst and there's inertia. You're not doing anything. Oh, gentlemen, do you know perhaps I consider myself an intelligent man only because all my life I've been able neither to begin nor to finish anything. Granted, I'm a babbler, a harmless, vexatious babbler. Vexatious, causing or tending to cause annoyance, frustration, or worry. But I would say he knows himself when he calls himself a vexatious babbler, would you? Like all of us. In other words, we're all vexatious babblers. But what is to be done if the direct and sole vocation of every intelligent man is babble? That is, the intentional pouring of water through a sieve. I put a note up here. What is the style for this narrator and why is it important? Well, his style is kind of like stream of consciousness. Remember we talked about that? He's writing his thoughts out, talking to some imaginary gentleman or whatever. These are notes from underground that the author's notes that he found. And he's saying that these type of people, like this narrator, have to exist in our time. And I would respectfully suggest that they still exist. There are people like this. We're like this a little bit. If you really think about this guy's he thinks too much, doesn't he? Or does he? Does he? Number 6. Oh, if I had done nothing simply from laziness. Heavens, how I should have respected myself then. I should have respected myself because I should at least have been capable of being lazy. There would at least have been one quality, as it were, positive in me, in which I could have believed myself. Question, what is he? Answer, he's a sluggard. How very pleasant it would have been to hear that of oneself. Sir, he's saying that if only he was lazy. He's not even lazy. He's not even lazy. Well, what is he if he's not doing anything? Is he lazy? I don't know. But he says even calling him a sluggard, that would have been pleasant, huh? It would mean that I was positively defined. I should have marked that. If you call him a slugger, he was positively defined. What does that mean? He doesn't have a definition. He's definitionless. Jimmy, that's not a word. Well, sure it is. Who are you? If somebody asked, who are you? How do you define yourself? What? Do you define yourself by your job, by your family? Who are you? He's looking at himself and saying, at least if you call me a sluggard, I'm defining it. I would be positively defined. And it would mean that there was something to say about me. Sluggard. Why, it's a calling, a vocation. It's a career. Do not jest. It is so. I should then be a member of the best club by right and should find my occupation in continually respecting myself. I knew a gentleman who prided himself all his life on being a connoisseur of Lafitte. He considered that this is a positive virtue, and he never doubted himself. He died, not simply with a tranquil, but with a triumphant conscience. And he was quite right, too. And then I should have chosen a career for myself. I should have been a sluggard and a glutton. Not a simple one, but for instance, one with sympathies for everything good and beautiful. Well, how do you like that? I have long had visions of it, that good and beautiful. It weighs heavily on my mind at 40. Remember, he's 40 years old. But that is at 40, then it would have been different. I should have found for myself a form of activity in keeping with it. To be precise, found for myself a form of activity in keeping with it, to be precise, drinking to the health of everything good and beautiful. I should have snatched at every opportunity to drop a tear in my glass and drain it to all that is good and beautiful. Someone with a deep knowledge and appreciation for wines, a connoisseur of Lafite, right? I should have then turned everything into the good and the beautiful. In the nastiest, questionable trash, I should have sought out the good and the beautiful. This is going to be a theme in here, the good and the beautiful. I should have exuded tears like a wet sponge. An artist, for instance, paints a picture worthy of gay. An artist. And once I drink to the health of the artist who painted a picture worthy of gay, because I love all that is good and beautiful. An author has written, as you will. And at once I drink to the health of anyone that you will, because I love all that is good and beautiful. Remember, he's a babbler. He called himself a babbler. He's babbling. I should claim respect for doing so, and I should persecute anyone who would not show me respect. I should live at ease. I should die with dignity. Why, it's charming, perfectly charming. And what a good round belly I should have grown. What a treble chin I should have established, and what a ruby nose I should have colored for myself, so that everyone would have said, looking at me, here is an asset. Here is something real and solid. And say what you like, it's very agreeable to hear such remarks about yourself in this negative age. What is this guy talking about, ladies and gentlemen? Well, he's basically saying, if only I could do something. That's what all this is about. Number 7. But these are all golden dreams. Oh, tell me, who was it that first announced, who was it that first proclaimed that man only does nasty things because he doesn't know his own interests? And that if he were enlightened, if his eyes were open to his real normal interests, man would at once cease to do nasty things, would at once become good and noble, because being enlightened and understanding his real advantage, he would see his own advantage in the good and nothing else. And we all know that not one man can consciously act against his own interests. So consequently, so to say, through necessity, he would begin doing good. Oh, the babe. Oh, the pure, innocent child. Why, in the first place, then, when in all of these thousands of years, has there been a time when man has acted only from his own interests? What is to be done with the millions of facts that bear witness that men consciously that it is fully understanding what their real interests have left them in the background and have rushed headlong on another path to meet peril and danger, compelled to this course by nobody, by nothing, but as if, and this is the Russian painter illusion he had, compelled by nobody, but they were simply disliking the beaten track and have obstinately, willfully struck out another difficult, absurd way, seeking it almost in darkness. So I suppose that this obstinacy and perversity were pleasanter to them than any advantage. Advantage. What is advantage? And will you take it upon yourself to define with perfect accuracy what the advantage of man consists? And what if it happens that a man's advantage sometimes not only may, but even must, consist in desiring in certain cases what is harmful to himself and not advantageous? And if so, if there can be such a case, the whole principle falls into dust. What do you think? Are there such cases? You're laughing. Well, laugh away, gentlemen. But only answer me, have man's advantages been reckoned up with perfect certainty? Are there not some advantages which not only have not been included, but cannot possibly be included under any classification? You see, gentlemen, you gentlemen have, to the best of my knowledge, taken your whole register of human advantages from the averages of statistical figures and political, economical formulas. That's a mouthful. Your advantages are prosperity, wealth, freedom, peace, and so on and on and on. So that a man who should, for instance, go openly and knowingly in opposition to that whole list would, to your thinking, and indeed mine too, of course, be an obstructionist or an absolute madman. Wouldn't he be that? But you know that this is what is surprising. Why does it so happen that all of these statisticians, these sages, these lovers of humanity, when they reckon up human advantages, invariably leave out one? They don't even take it into their reckoning in the form in which it should be taken. And the whole reckoning depends upon that. It would be no great matter. They would simply have to take this advantage, and add it to the list. But the trouble is that this strange advantage doesn't fall under any classification. And it's not in any list. You know, I have a friend, for instance. Gentlemen, of course, he's your friend too. And indeed, there is no one to whom he is not a friend. And when he prepares for any undertaking, this gentleman immediately explains to you elegantly and clearly exactly how he must act in accordance with the laws of reason and truth. What is more, he, my friend, your friend, will talk to you with excitement and passion of the true normal interests of man. And with irony, he will upbraid the short-sighted fools who don't understand their own interests, nor their true significance of virtue. And within a quarter of an hour, without any sudden outside provocation, but simply through something inside of him, which is stronger than all interest, he's going to go off on quite another different track. That is, he's going to act in direct opposition to what he's been just saying about himself. In opposition to the laws of reason, in opposition to his own advantage. In fact, in opposition to everything. I warn you that my friend is a compound personality, and therefore it's difficult to blame him as an individual. The fact is, gentlemen, it seems that there must really exist something that is dearer to almost every man than his greatest advantages. Or, not to be illogical, that there is a most advantageous advantage, parentheses, the very one omitted from which we just now spoke, close parentheses, which is more important and more advantageous than all the other advantages, for the sake of which a man is, if necessary, is ready to act in opposition to all of the laws. This advantageous advantage. That is, in opposition to reason, in opposition to honor, peace, prosperity. In fact, in opposition to all those excellent and useful things, if only he can attain that fundamental, most advantageous advantage, which is dearer to him than all. Quote, yes, but it's an advantage all the same, end quote, you will retort. Excuse me, I'll make the point clear. And it is not a case of playing upon words. What matters is that this advantage is remarkable from the very fact that it breaks down all classifications and continually shatters every system constructed by lovers of mankind for the benefit of mankind. In fact, the advantageous advantage, upsets everything. But before I mention this advantage to you, I want to comprise myself personally, and therefore I want to compose myself personally, and therefore I boldly declare that all of these fine systems, all of these theories for explaining to mankind their real normal interests, in order that inevitably striving to pursue these interests, they may at once become good and noble, are, in my opinion, mere logical exercise. Yes, logical exercise. And to maintain this theory of regeneration of mankind by means of the pursuit of his own advantage is, to my mind, almost the same thing as to affirm, for instance, following Buckle, that through civilization mankind becomes softer and consequently less bloodthirsty and less fitted for warfare. Buckle, Henry Thomas Buckle, is an English historian, considered a prominent figure in philosophy, particularly known for his unfinished work called The History of Civilization, where he argued for scientific approach to study historical events, often being cited as the father of scientific history. Right? Following Buckle, logically, it does seem to follow from his arguments. But man has such a predilection for systems and abstract deductions that he is ready to distort the truth intentionally. He is ready to deny the evidence of his senses only to justify his logic. That's important. You should think about that. I take this example because it is the most glaring instance of it. Only look about you. Blood is being spilt in streams, and in the merriest way, as though it were champagne. Take the whole of the 19th century in which Buckle lived. Take Napoleon, the great and also the present one. Take North America, the Eternal Union. Take the farce of Schleswig-Holstein. And what is the civilization soften in us? The only gain of civilization for mankind is the greater capacity for variety of sensations, and absolutely nothing more. And through the development of this many-sidedness, man may come into finding enjoyment in bloodshed. In fact, this has already happened to him. Have you noticed that it is the most civilized gentlemen who have been the subtlest slaughterers, to whom the Attilas and the Stenka-Radzins could not hold a candle? And if they are not so conspicuous as the Attilas and the Stenka-Radzins, it is simply because they are so often met and are so ordinary that they have become so familiar to us. And here's a note of who Razin was, Cossack leader who led a rebellion against Tsarist bureaucracy. Razin was captured and executed in Red Square on June 6, 1671. His head and limbs were mounted on stakes. You see, he's talking about how bloodthirsty people still are, right? They're not less bloodthirsty as they become civilized. I think he might have a point. What do you think? In the old days, he saw justice. Where did I leave off here? Sorry. In any case, civilization has made mankind, if not more bloodthirsty, at least more vilely, more loathsomely bloodthirsty. And in the old days, man, saw justice and bloodshed, pardon me, and with the conscience at peace, exterminated those he thought proper. And now we do not think bloodshed abominable, and yet we engage in this abomination, and even with more energy than ever. Which is worse? Decide that for yourselves, gentlemen. They say that Cleopatra excuse the instance of Roman history, was fond of sticking gold pins in her slave girls' breasts and derived gratification from their screams and witherings. And you're going to say that that was barbarous times, that those barbarous times, they're barbarous, because comparatively speaking, pins are stuck in even now. That though man has now learned to see more clearly than in barbarous ages, he is still far from having learned to act as reason and science would dictate. But yet you fully are convinced that he will be sure to learn that when he gets rid of a certain old habits, and when common sense and science have completely re-educated human nature and turned it into normal direction, you are confident then that man will cease from intentional error and will, so to say, be compelled not to want to set his will against his normal interests. That is not at all. Then you will say science itself will teach man, parentheses, though to my mind that's superfluous luxury, end parentheses, that he, man, never has really had any caprice or will of his own, and that he himself is something of the nature of a piano key or a stop of an organ, and that these are besides things called the laws of nature, so that everything man does is not done by his willing it, but is done of itself by the laws of nature. This is very, very important, ladies and gentlemen. Consequently, we have only to discover these laws of nature, and then man will no longer have to answer for his actions. And life will become exceedingly easy for him. All human actions then will, of course, be tabulated according to these laws mathematically. And the tables of logarithms up to 108,000 and entered into an index, or better still, they would be published, certain edifying works of the nature of encyclopedic lexicons, in which everything will be so clearly calculated and explained that there will be no more incidents and adventures in the world. Okay? Then, this is all you will say, no economic relations will be established, already made and worked out with mathematical exactitude, so that every possible question will vanish in the twinkling of an eye, simply because every possible answer to it will be provided. Then the, quote, palace of crystal, end quote, will be built. Then, in fact, those will be the helicon, happy days. Of course, there's no guaranteeing, this is my comment, that it will not be, for instance, frightfully dull. For what will one have to do when everything will be calculated and tabulated? But on the other hand, everything will be extraordinarily rational. Of course, boredom may lead you to do anything. It is boredom sets one sticking golden pins into people. But all of that would not matter. What is bad, this is my comment again, that I dare say people will be thankful for the gold pins. Man is stupid, phenomenally stupid. Or rather, he is not at all stupid, but he is so ungrateful that you could not find another like him in all creation. I, for instance, would not be in the least surprised if all of a sudden, apropos of nothing, in the midst of general prosperity, a gentleman with an ignoble, or rather with a reactionary and ironical countenance, were to arise, and putting his arms akimbo, right, to purpose, would say to all of us, quote, I say, gentlemen, hadn't we better kick over the whole show and scatter rationalism to the winds? Simply to send these logarithms to the devil and to enable us to live once more at our own sweet, foolish will. End quote. I hope you're following this, ladies and gentlemen, because he's talking to himself about logic and reason versus free will. You understand that? Mathematical certainty? That again would not matter, he continues, but what is annoying is that he would be sure to find followers such as the nature of man. And all of that is the most foolish reason which one would think was hardly worth mentioning. that man everywhere at all times, whoever, akimbo means your hands are on your hips and elbows. That's the way he was talking. And the Crystal Palace was a cast iron and plate glass structure originally in Hyde Park, London. Remember, this guy is well read. He's read a lot. He's an intellectual. Okay? All right. So we said, he may be preferred to act as he chose and not in the least as his reason and advantage dictated. And one may choose what is contrary to one's own interests, and sometimes one positively ought to do that. That's my idea. One's own free, unfettered choice, one's own caprice, however wild it be, one's own fancy worked up at times to a frenzy, is that very most advantageous advantage, which we've overlooked, which comes under no classification and against which all systems and theories are continually being shattered to atoms. What's the advantageous advantage? Your own free, unfettered choice, your own caprice, your own choice. You understand? That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying is the advantageous advantage. Freedom of choice, which cannot be categorized. And how do these wiseacres, these know-it-alls, right? That should be know-it-all, right? Sorry. Let me fix this. I was typing know-it-all and I mistyped it. The know-it-all, right? These wiseacres, that man wants a normal, virtuous choice. How do these wiseacres know that man wants a virtuous choice, right? Does freedom of will mean you'll always choose the right thing? What has made them conceive that a man must want a rationally advantageous choice? Advantageous choice. What a man wants is simply an independent choice. Whatever that independence may cost and wherever it may lead, and choice, of course, the devil only knows what choice. And therein lies what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. Number 8. But you know there is no such thing as choice in reality. Say what you like. You will impose with a chuckle. Science has succeeded so far in analyzing man so that we know already that choice and what is called freedom of will is nothing else than, look at those dashes. Wait, gentlemen, stay. I meant to begin with that myself, and I confess, I was rather frightened. I was just going to say that the devil only knows what choice depends on, and what perhaps was a very good thing. But I remembered the teaching of science, and then I pulled myself up. And here you have begun upon it. Indeed, if there really is someday discovered a formula for all of our desires and caprices, that is an explanation of what they depend upon by the laws that they arise, how they develop, what they are aiming at in one case and in another, and so on and on. And that is a real mathematical formula. Well, then, most likely, man will at once cease to feel desire. Indeed, he'll be certain to do so. He'll never feel desire. For who would want to choose by rule? Besides, he will at once be transformed from a human being into an organ stop or something of that sort. For what is a man without desires, without free will, and without choice, if not a stop in an organ? What do you think? Let's reckon the chances. Can such a thing happen? You decide. Our choice is usually mistaken from a false view of our advantage. We sometimes choose absolute nonsense because in our foolishness we see in that nonsense the easiest means of attaining a supposed advantage. But when all of that is explained and worked out on paper, which is perfectly possible, for it is contemptible and senseless to suppose that some laws of nature man will never understand, then certainly so-called desires will no longer exist. For if a desire should come into conflict with reason, we shall then reason and not desire. because it will be impossible retaining our reason to be senseless in our desires. Do you follow that? And in that way, knowingly act against reason and desire to injure ourselves. I want to whistle. Wow, what the heck is he talking about? If a desire should come into conflict with reason, so you have a desire and you have a reason, you're a thinking animal, right? But you have a desire. I want to eat beef. I like beef. And you have a desire for beef, but reason says don't eat too much beef, right? We shall then reason and not desire. Give up your beef, desire for beef, because it will be impossible retaining our reason to be senseless in our desires. Reason will always trump, theoretically, desires, or will it? And in that way, knowingly act against reason, and then we're going to desire to injure ourselves. I'm going to eat that beef anyway, right? And as all choice and reasoning can be really calculated, according to the science, because there will someday be discovered the laws of our own so-called free will. So joking apart, there may be one day be something like a table constructed of them, so that we really shall choose in accordance with that table. For instance, if someday they calculate and prove to me that I made a long nose at someone because I could not help making a long nose at him, and that I had to do it. I had to make a long nose. I had to make a face at him in that particular way. Then what freedom is left for me? Especially if I am a learned man and I have taken my degree somewhere. Then I should be able to calculate my whole life for 30 years. In short, if this could be arranged, there would be nothing left for us to do. Anyway, we should have to understand that. And in fact, we ought unwearingly to repeat to ourselves that at such and such a time and in such and such circumstances, nature does not ask our leave, our permission, that we have got to take nature as she is and not fashion her to suit our fancy. And if we really aspire to formulas and tables and rules, well then, to the chemical retort, then there's no help for it. We must accept the retort too. And it will be accepted without consent. We have nothing to say about it. You see, this is profound, ladies and gentlemen, this is profound arguments on freedom of will versus determinism. Yes, but here I come to a stop. Gentlemen, you must excuse me for being over-philosophical. It's the result of 40 years underground. Allow me to indulge my fancy. You see, gentlemen, reason is an excellent thing. There's no disputing that, but reason is nothing but reason. And it satisfies only the rational side of man's nature, while will is a manifestation of his whole life. And that is the whole human life, including reason and all the impulses. It's very important. And although our life in this manifestation of it is often worthless, yet it is life and not simply extracting square roots. Here I, for instance, quite naturally want to live in order to satisfy my capacities for life. And not simply my capacity for reasoning, that is, but not simply 1/20th of my capacity for life. What does reason know? Reason only knows what it has succeeded in learning. Some things, perhaps, it will never learn. And that is the poor comfort, and why not say so frankly. And so human nature acts as a whole with everything that is in it, consciously or unconsciously. And if it goes wrong, it lives. I suspect, gentlemen, that you are looking at me with compassion. And you tell me again that an enlightened and developed man, such as, in short, the future man will be, cannot consciously desire anything disadvantageous to him. He can't want anything disadvantageous to him. And that can be proved mathematically. Man will never want anything that hurts him. I thoroughly agree. It can by mathematics. You can do that. But let me repeat for the 100th time. There is one case, and only one, when man may consciously, purposely desire what is injurious to him, what is stupid, very stupid, simply in order to have the right to desire for himself even what is very stupid, and not to be bound by an obligation to desire what is sensible. This is one of the most important statements you're going to take away from Notes from Underground, that man is not a math formula, that he may in fact choose something that's bad for him. Well, Jimmy, that's not possible. Really? How about smoking? How about smoking cigarettes? You know, let's think. We can talk about that. We're going to talk about that. What about smoking? It's not good for you. You choose to do it. Well, that's just a habit if you have the habit. It's hard to break a habit, Jimmy. Well, is it? This guy's arguing that with reason you should be able to do it. Think about this. Of course, this very stupid thing, this caprice of ours, may be in reality, gentlemen, more advantageous for us than anything else on earth, especially in certain cases. And in particular, it may be more advantageous than any advantage, even when it does obvious harm to us and contradicts the soundest conclusions of our reason concerning our advantage. For in any circumstances, it preserves for us what is most precious and most important. That is our personality and our individuality. What's it? The freedom to choose. Some, you see, maintain that this really is the most precious thing for all. Choice can, of course, if it chooses to be in agreement with reason, and especially if this is not abused by any kind of within bounds, choice is profitable and sometimes praiseworthy. But very often, and even most often, choice is utterly and stubbornly opposed to reason. And do you know that? Do you know that too is profitable, sometimes even praiseworthy? Do you know that? Gentlemen, let's suppose that a man is not stupid. Parentheses, indeed, one cannot refuse to be that, if only from one consideration, that if a man is stupid, then who's wise? But if he is not stupid, then man is monstrously ungrateful, phenomenally ungrateful. In fact, I believe that the best definition of a man is an ungrateful biped. Biped is an animal that uses two legs for walking. Phenomenally, remarkably. So his definition of a man is an ungrateful biped. But that is not all. That is not the worst defect. Man's worst defect is perpetual moral obligatory. A deviation from moral conduct, the art of being deliberately vague, moral vagary. From the days of the flood to the Swiss Holstein period, moral obligity and consequently the lack of good sense, obliqueness, right? Moral haziness. For it has long been accepted that a lack of good sense is due to no other cause than moral obligity. Put it to the test and cast your eyes upon the history of mankind. What will you see? Is it a grand spectacle? Grand, if you like? Take the Colossus of Rhodes. And there's a note for the Colossus of Rhodes someplace. Let's see. If not, it's up here. There it is. The Colossus was estimated to be 100 and 110 feet tall, making it the tallest statue of its time. One of its fingers was said to be larger than the most statues of the time. So take the Colossus of Rhodes, for instance. That's worth something. With good reason, Mr. Ankevzi testifies of it that some say that is the work of man's hands, while others maintain that it has been created by nature. Is it many-colored? Maybe it was many-colored, too. If one takes the dress uniforms, military and civilian, of all the people of all the ages, that alone is worth something. And if you take in undress uniforms, you will never get to the end of it. No historian would be equal to the job. Is it monstrous? Well, maybe it's monstrous, too. It's fighting and fighting. They are fighting now. They fought first and they fought last. You will admit that it is almost too monstrous. In short, one may say anything about the history of the world, anything that might enter the most disordered imagination, but the only thing you can't say about the history of the world is that it's rational. Ladies and gentlemen, I think he makes a good point. Would you agree with that? The very word sticks in your throat. And indeed, this is the odd thing that is continually happening. There are continually turning up in life moral and rational persons, sages and lovers of humanity who make it their object to live their lives morally and rationally as possible, a light to their neighbors simply in order to show them that it is possible to live morally and rationally. Right? So he's basically saying that there's some people who live like that to show us that they can live like that. And yet we all know that those very people, sooner or later, have been false to themselves. They play some queer trick, often a most unseemly one. So now I ask you, what can be expected of man since he is being endowed with such strange qualities? Shower upon him every earthly blessing, drown him in a sea of happiness so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface, and give him economic prosperity such that he should have nothing else to do but sleep and eat cakes and busy himself with the continuation of the species. And even then, out of sheer ingratitude and sheer spite, man would play you some nasty trick. He would even risk his cakes and would deliberately desire the most fatal rubbish, the most uneconomical absurdity, simply to introduce in all of this positive good a sense of fatal, fantastic element. It is just this fantastic dreams, his vulgar folly, that he will desire to retain, simply in order to prove himself, as though that were necessary, and that men are still men and not the keys of a piano, which the laws of nature threaten to control so completely that soon one will be able to desire nothing but the calendar. And that is not all. Even if man were really nothing but a piano key, even if this were proved to him by natural science and mathematics, even then man would not be reasonable, but would purposely do something perverse, simply out of ingratitude, simply to gain his point. And if he does not find the means, he will contrive destruction and chaos, and he will contrive suffering of all sorts, only to gain a point. And he will launch a curse upon the world, as only a man can curse. And it is privilege, the primary distinction between him and other animals, may be his curse alone. And he will attain his object, that is, he will convince himself he is a man, not a piano key. If you say that all of this can be calculated and tabulated, chaos and darkness and curses, so that mere possibility of calculating it all beforehand would stop it all, and reason would reassert itself, and then man would purposely go mad in order to be rid of reason and gain his point. I believe in it. I answer for it. For the whole work of man really seems to consist of nothing but proving to himself every minute that he is a man and not a piano key. I am not a piano key. It may be at the cost of his skin, and it may be by cannibalism, and yet being so, one can't help but be tempted to rejoice that it has not yet come off, and that desire still depends on something we don't know. There's a myth in Greek called the myth of Sisyphus, where Sisyphus was condemned for helping mankind. He was condemned to roll the rock up the hill and never get to the top. So he would roll the rock, and just as he got to the top, the rock would roll back down. So you have to go back down and roll it back up, roll it back down, roll it back up. So that was what the existentialists called, absurdity. That's absurd, right? Why roll the rock? Well, until you figure out that the joy is not getting to the top, you have to learn how to get joy from rolling the rock. You're going to scream at me, says the underground man. That is, if you condense to do so, that no one is touching my free will, that all they are concerned with is that my will should be of itself, its own free will, coincide with my own normal interests. Good heavens, gentlemen, what sort of free will is left when we come to tabulation and arithmetic, when it will all be a case of twice 2 makes 4. Twice 2 makes 4 without my will, as if free will meant that. Let's keep going. Just a little bit more, ladies and gentlemen. Number 9. Gentlemen, I'm not joking. I'm joking. Sorry. Gentlemen, I'm joking. I know myself that my jokes are not brilliant, but one can't take everything as a joke. I'm perhaps jesting again. Gentlemen, I'm tormented by questions. Answer them for me. You, for instance, you want to cure men of their old habits and reform their will in accordance with science, good sense. But how do you know not only that it is possible, but also that it's desirable to reform a man in that way? And what leads you to the conclusion that man's inclinations need reforming? In short, how do you know that such a reformation will benefit to a man? And go to the root of the matter. Why are you so positively convinced that not to act against his real normal interests, guaranteed by the conclusions of reason and arithmetic, is certainly always advantageous for man and must always be a law for mankind? This is a profound statement. So far, this is only your supposition. It may be that the law of logic, but not the law of humanity. You see, gentlemen, maybe I'm mad. Allow me to defend myself. I agree that man is preeminently a creative animal, predestined to strive consciously for an object and to engage in engineering, that is, incessantly and eternally to make new roads wherever they may lead. But the reason why he wants sometimes to go off on a tangent may just be that he is predestined to make that road. And perhaps, too, that however stupid the direct practical man may be, the thought sometimes will occur to him that the road almost always does lead somewhere, and that the destination it leads to is less important than the process of making it. And that the chief thing is to save the well-conducted child from despising engineering, so that giving way to the fatal idleness, which, as we all know, is the mother of all vices, man likes to make roads and to create. And that is a fact beyond dispute. But why has he such a passionate love for destruction and chaos, too? Tell me that. But on that point, I want to say a couple of words myself. May it not be that he loves chaos and destruction? Parentheses, there can be no disputing that he sometimes loves that, right? Because he is instinctively afraid of attaining his object and completing the edifice that he is constructing. Don't forget the myth of Sisyphus I just told you. Who knows, perhaps he only loves that edifice from a distance, and by no means in love with it at close quarters. Perhaps he only loves the building, and he doesn't want to live in it. But he will live in it when completed for use of the l'anime domestique, such as the ants and the sheep and so on. And now the ants, they have a different taste. They have marvelous edifices, right? That pattern which endures forever. It's called the ant heap. And with the ant heap, respectable race of ants began with such. You see how he gets scared? I don't know how his mind works, ladies and gentlemen, but we're following him, right? We're following him. With the ant heap, the respectable race of ants began, and with the ant heap, they will probably end, which does the greatest credit to their perseverance and good sense. But man is frivolous and incongruous creature, and perhaps like a chess player, loves the process of the game, not the end of it. And who knows? There is a saying with certainty, perhaps the only goal on earth to which mankind is striving lies in this incessant process of attaining. In other words, in life itself, and not in the thing to be attained. There's the myth of Sisyphus again, which must always be expressed as a formula, as positive as twice two makes four. And such positiveness, that's not life, gentlemen. It's the beginning of death. Positiveness is not life, it's death. Anyway, man has always been afraid of this mathematical certainty, and I'm afraid of it now. Granted that man does nothing but seek mathematical certainty. He traverses oceans, sacrifices his life in the quest, but to succeed, really to find it, he dreads that, I assure you. He feels that when he has found it, there'll be nothing for him to look for. When workmen have finished their work and they do receive their pay, they go to the tavern, and then they are taken to the police station. And there is the occupation for a week. But where can man go? Anyway, one can observe a certain awkwardness about him when he has attained such objects. Man loves the process of attaining, but he doesn't quite like to have attained. That, of course, is absurd, isn't it? In fact, man is a comical creature. There seems to be a kind of jest in everything. But yet, mathematical certainty is, after all, something insufferable, isn't it? Twice two makes four seems to be simply a piece of insolence. Twice two makes four is a pert coxcomb who stands with arms akimbo, barring your path and spitting. A vain and conceited man, a dandy, coxcomb. I admit that twice two makes four is really excellent, but if we are giving everything to its due, twice two makes four is sometimes very charming too. And why you are so firmly, so triumphantly convinced that only the normal and the positive, in other words, only what is conducive to welfare, is for the advantage of man. Is not reason in error in regards to advantage? Does not man perhaps love something besides well-being? Perhaps he's just as fond of suffering. Well, maybe suffering is just as great a benefit to him as well-being. Man is sometimes extraordinarily, passionately in love with suffering. And that's a fact. There is no need to appeal to universal history to prove that. Just ask yourself if you're a man and you've lived at all. As far as my personal opinion is concerned, to care only for the well-being seems to me positively ill-bred. Whether it's good or bad, it's sometimes very pleasant to smash things. That's one of Jimmy's famous quotes. He uses that a lot. Whether it's good or bad, sometimes it's nice to break things. I hold no brief for suffering, nor will ever either. I am standing for my caprice and for its being guaranteed to me when necessary. Suffering would be out of place in vaudevilles, for instance. I know that in the Palace of Crystal, it is unthinkable. Suffering means doubt, negation. And what would be good in the Palace of Crystal for that, if there could be any doubt about it? And yet, I think man will never renounce real suffering, destruction, chaos. Why suffering is the sole origin of consciousness. Suffering is the origin of consciousness. Think about that. Though I did lay it down at the beginning that consciousness is the greatest misfortune of man, and yet I know man prizes it and would not give it up for any satisfaction. Consciousness, for instance, is infinitely superior to twice two makes four. Because once you have mathematical certainty, there's nothing left to understand. There will be nothing left but to bottle up your five senses and plunge into contemplation. But if you stick to consciousness, even though the same result is attained, you can at least flog yourself at times. And that will, at any rate, liven you up. Reactionary as it is, corporal punishment is better than nothing. I said that to a friend the other day, and we had a good laugh. She's a physicist. Number 10. You believe in a palace of crystal that can never be destroyed, a palace at which one will not be able to put out one's tongue or make a long nose on the sly. And perhaps that's just why I am afraid of this palace of crystal, this edifice, and that crystal and it will never be destroyed, and that one cannot put one's tongue out, even on the sly. You see, if it were not a palace, let's say it was a hen house, I might creep into it to avoid getting wet. And yet I would not call it the hen house, a palace out of gratitude for keeping me dry. I'd call it a palace. You laugh and you say in such circumstances that a hen house is as good as a mansion. Well, yeah, I would answer, if one had to live simply and to keep out of the rain. But what is to be done if I have been taken into my head that it is not the only object in life to be taken out of the rain, and that if one must live, it's better to live in a mansion? What if I thought that? You've been reading with Jimmy. This is part 2 of Notes from Underground. We're not going to analyze this like we did the first part. We're going to keep reading. So thank you for staying with me. This was a long one, but worthwhile. You see, when you're reading this, you have to really, the reason I read it out loud to you is to try to put you into the novel, to get you inside this guy's head. This guy, well, Jimmy, I never thought like this. Well, that's good, right? Jimmy, I don't want to think like this. Well, that's good too. Maybe you don't want to think like this, but you should think like this, because there are certain things he says in here that are true. For example, if you look at history, seriously, if you examine history, can any one of us say that history follows a rational pattern? People are rational, right? Are they? If the stock market were rational, we'd all make a lot of money, wouldn't we? But people, the way they buy and sell stocks is not rational, right? Sometimes they refer to that as the herd. Think about it. There's a lot of things in here to think about. This is not easy reading, but it's excellent reading. And now you know perhaps why Jimmy likes Dostoevsky. Learn more about Dostoevsky by reading part 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And be sure to visit our website, readingwithjimmy.com. You can email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. There's plenty of other classics on here, but stick with Notes from Underground. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day. Stay safe and take care.